Okay, just two quick program notes before introducing our next speaker. Program note number one, for those of you who were expecting that Bill Henderson was going to be the moderator of our next speaker, I'm sorry to disappoint, but Bill, we had a change in schedule for reasons which will be my point number two, and so I have the dubious privilege of trying to pinch hit for Bill Henderson. But we'll do my best. So point number two is our next speaker, if there were to be an award given for best camper in terms of making it here to the conference, our next speaker would be one of our co-winners in my evaluation. He was due to speak early this morning, but had 2 flights canceled last night, but still decided that he was going to get up early this morning with the weather in doubt, and made his way here. John, a great round of applause for John Fernandez for making it here. Just very, very quickly, it's really my great pleasure to introduce John Fernandez. John is a really interesting guy, besides the fact that he's on an airplane probably more than he or his family would like. John spends a lot of time in DC, where I'm based. And of course, the first time we ever crossed paths was in Germany. Anyway, John is probably has one of the most interesting jobs of anybody in the legal ecosystem. He is a lawyer. He was a practicing lawyer. He's been a politician. He was the mayor of Bloomington. He served in the Obama administration as Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He has done a whole bunch of interesting things, and his current job title is Chief Innovation Officer of Dentons. He runs NextLaw Labs. And I would just say one other final note, and I'll yield the floor to John. Innovation is a word that is much, I think, overused and overheated in our industry. But if there is one guy who really is in the epicenter of innovation in terms of legal delivery, it's John, so it's my great pleasure to introduce him.
Great, thanks, Mark. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank all of you for being here. I was really disappointed by the change in schedule, because I did want to hear some of the earlier presentations and engage in this whole dialogue. But I guess the flexibility and agility is just exactly the kind of mentality we have to bring to our innovation agendas. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective about what's happening in our, as I say, the innovation imperative. But this is a work in progress, so bear with me, okay? And you're probably wondering why anybody in big law, especially big law, would include Optimist in their title. Well, like I said, it's a work in progress, but I am optimistic, and frankly, what's the alternative, right? I mean, we're going through some tremendous changes, but I think there are some real data points that reflect change is happening, and that there are lots of things going on to be optimistic about. So let's start with a little perspective. Some of you may have seen this before. It's a graph that Astro Teller put together. He's got the greatest title of anybody in any industry, the captain of the moonshot, right? He's an alphabet. What he did is he looked at all of the technological change, or inventions, if you will, and tracked them over time, and tried to measure the impact and rate of change as a result of all of those innovations and inventions. And of course, we see this major spike happening just prior to 2007 and beyond. And a lot of us know why. I mean, there was just fundamental changes and advancements in cognitive computing. Of course, we saw things like smartphones and all of that, but it's all the heavy technology and thinking behind it. It's things like GitHub and Hadoop and all these things that I don't even understand, but I can say them, that really were foundational, like just drove all that change. So we saw this huge spike. But that's not the only thing that was happening. You know, there's all these other changes that affect our world that were going on simultaneously, and the pace of change as a result of that was intensifying at the same time. You know, globalization, climate change, you know, future work, our lifespans are getting longer. There's just all these things happening all at the same time. And that rate of change is exponentially growing, and it's affecting all of us. Not just in our legal work, but in our lives generally. And it creates challenges. People can only adapt so much. And that's one of the things that we know, that when you look at this unprecedented amount of change, and then add into it our ability as humans to adapt, there's actually a gap. And that adaptability gap creates a lot of stress, and it creates a lot of uncertainty. And in that context, it also creates a lot of resistance, and resistance to change. But of course, most of us here are lawyers, and lawyers aren't really human. So when you look at this, you add in the lawyer adaptability gap, it's even bigger than the human adaptability gap, right? So, I mean, we know what we're like. You know, I say that lovingly as a lawyer, married to a lawyer, you know, it is what it is. But it's true to some extent. And then what happens when you put a bunch of lawyers together in a thing we call law firms, and you get an even bigger gap. And that's the law firm adaptability gap. And some of it is training. I mean, we're trained to be very skeptical. We question everything. We look for people to blame if something goes wrong. And you add it all up, and it just creates even more resistance to change. But what happens, I think, is that this really is, you know, the challenge we have. All joking aside, it is probably the biggest challenge. And it'd be easy to kind of just stop the presentation right here and say we're doomed. You know, big law's dead as we know it. We should all go home and find a new job. But I think in reality, and this may come back to bite me, Mark, but I think we're almost at the dawning of a new golden era of law. Not necessarily law firms, but law and lawyers, and I think for many law firms, especially those that get it and they lean into this environment. You know, lawyers aren't snowflakes. We're part of this larger environment that's happening, and all businesses are having to deal with the same profound changes that lawyers and law firms are dealing with. And it's not the first time that we've gone through these big eras of transformation. Or, you know, some will say we're in this fourth industrial revolution. And the law and lawyers and all of us, all of our businesses, our clients, our communities, have all had to adjust and adapt throughout all of these major revolutionary periods. The one we're in now is different, and it's having profound change. And you know, it's real easy to, it can be real easy to freak out about all of this and be negative and worrisome. But I think there's also an upside to all of this. All these things that are happening are changing just fundamentally how we engage with technology, how we engage with each other. And you know, if we get past kind of the PTSD part of this, and for those of us in America, that's really post-Trump-matic disorders. You know, it's really easy to be kind of stressed out and nervous and depressed, but I think there's just so much evidence how these revolutionary changes are having a huge positive impact on humankind. And we should embrace this and be excited about it and lean into it. And when we think about what that means for lawyers and the law, there's going to be tremendous opportunities to have unbelievable impacts on society. The law and regulations are so far behind when it comes to dealing with all these big changes. So if you're a policy geek or a creative lawyer, you're going to have unbelievable opportunities to really redefine some of the constructs that glue us together as societies, economies, businesses. It's a very interesting time. And for lawyers who are working with clients, and take this kind of multidisciplinary approach to thinking about the context of all this, it's a very exciting time, frankly. And from a law firm perspective, I think if you lean into this, the market is really huge. Instead, these are the kind of headlines we typically see, right? It's, we're all going to be extinct because of automation. Of course, the answer to that question is no. We know we're not going to be extinct. Is it going to be different? Absolutely. But who in this room would disagree with the concept that leveraging technology to improve what we do is a bad thing? And who can really say that we don't need to do it? Of course we do. There's some phenomenal opportunities here if we embrace it and do it for all the right reasons. We hear a lot about, we went through this period where it was all about, well, everything's got to be better, faster, cheaper. Well, that's true. But I think in law, and if we leverage technology, especially a lot of the advanced data power, automation, machine learning, predictive analytics, it can actually make the law that we deliver better. It can actually be better, not just faster, not just cheaper, but the actual quality is going to increase. And to me, that's exciting. That is really, I think, the kind of value that we can deliver through innovation, and at the end of the day, that's what innovation is supposed to be about. So, if you think about it too, in the context of all this phenomenal change, I wish Bill was here, because Bill Henderson and I always talk about, the statistics of what's going on in the demand for law. And we always talk about the notion of unrealized demand. Our clients, especially for a firm like ours who predominantly works with large multinational companies, they can't buy all the legal advice and regulatory advice they actually need within the context of our current global legal services industry. They just can't buy it, it's too expensive. Yet we live in this unbelievably interconnected, complicated world where we need more than we can buy. So if we lean into all of this, think about our business models differently, think of how we deliver services differently, and can be more competitive, there's a tremendous amount of unrealized gain, demand, and market share that law firms can achieve. I don't know if some of you may have seen this presentation that was on SlideShare by Jay Unum, who's actually here in Chicago. I think this is a fantastic presentation, and I'd encourage you to go to SlideShare and check it out. But I think it's just such a realistic perspective on where we are right now in our industry, and how the industry, media, and all of us kind of in this echo chamber react to headlines, etc. And I'm a geek. Mark didn't include that in his description of me, but I really am. And what I love about her presentation is that she tries to place the current state of our industry in the context of Rogers' innovation diffusion curve, and then she overlaps that with the Gartner hype curve, and for a geek like me, it's awesome. And I know Bill would geek out too, because he's way into the Rogers innovation curve. But I think the point is that she'll make in her presentation is that, all industries experience the same thing, where you go through these cycles of product development. And there's some really quick cycles where there's all this hype, and you got to get there early, adopters and the fast movers. And then there's always this inevitable steep drop. And that's where, reality hits you right in the face, and you're dealing with failure. It's not delivering as promised. And that's where all the really hard work starts. That's where the real sustainable, valuable innovation happens. You just have to power through it and stay with it. And so as she concludes, and again, I'd encourage you to take a look at this, is that, the bottom line is that, lawyers, we're not that unique, and that every industry, every professional group deals with the same kind of resistance to change. It's not that unique to law. She also focuses on how we need to get past the hype and really focus on the actual point of innovation. You know, we don't innovate just to say we're innovative. We innovate to solve real problems, to create real new value. And in the process, you create this kind of sustainable growth. And our investments of time and capital, they gotta be really focused on the purpose of the innovation. And you know, there's a lot of me too and trying to do this and that, and it looks, you know, kind of like a way to differentiate yourself in the market when there's so much sameness. But if it's not really laser focused and purposeful, it just, you know, it fades away, doesn't get traction, and you end up losing credibility in the process. And I think the most important thing is that this kind of work is really hard. It takes real work. It requires real risk. And arguably, it takes a lot more time than anybody expects. But at the end of the day, it really requires sustained, committed leadership. Otherwise, you know, if your leadership in your organizations aren't willing to tolerate experimentation, not willing to tolerate some failure, and as soon as something doesn't work, they just freak out and kill everything, you might as well not even start, because there's going to be failure. And I say this almost with a little bit of quiver in my voice, right? So I'll talk a little bit about later about, you know, what we've been doing, but Mark mentioned NextLaw Labs. Well, we created a pretty interesting thing. We've got a portfolio that we've invested in of a bunch of companies. Companies fail, right? That's why you have a portfolio. So I've yet to have the conversation with our investors, our partners, when that company fails, but one will. And that'll be a real test, right? You have to be willing to fail, and if you're not, you might as well not even start. So there are a lot of things happening in the market. I'll just mention a couple. In the big law world, I mean, Baker McKenzie, one of the oldest, most established law firms, I mean, they've been, you know, pushing real, sustainable, important innovation, not just around their diligence work with AI, but I think the more interesting thing is some of the design thinking that they've been doing in collaboration with clients. We see a lot of new innovation labs popping up, or these kinds of accelerators at law firms. NDR's labs, what I think is really interesting about their model is that it's not just within the law firm. I mean, they're engaging with innovation specialists, investors, lawyers in a very collaborative environment, and it's very focused. So I know that they just, you know, recently invested in 2 specific companies that are making solutions that they're interested in, but it's a very disciplined kind of multidisciplinary approach that's focused on collaborating in the ecosystem, not within some echo chamber within a law firm, and I think that's really powerful. We all know A&O has been a leader for years, you know, not just in the kind of collaboration part of it, which they are now continue to be a leader in, but for years they've really focused on using the technology to improve the quality of the actual legal advisory services they deliver, and I think they should be commended for that. A recent headline was out there, and this is cool because it's a law department that's driving the change, where Barclays brought together their outside counsel, not just one firm, but a whole subset from the panel to innovate in a collaborative way. And that's really unusual in law, to see people kind of put down their guard and actually come together, warts and all, to kind of figure out a better way to get things done. And I think that that kind of collaborative approach, rather than, you know, what we've been through, which is so much more of a kind of procurement approach, is going to be the source of the kind of sustainable innovation that changes our industry, where you have partners coming together, realizing that they both have value, they both need value, and it can't be so one-sided that someone wins and loses, that if they do it right, they do it together, there's going to be real value delivery for the buyer of the services as well as the provider, and that becomes sustainable. And of course, you know, I got to say a little something about Dentons. we launched NextLaw Labs in 2015, and that was one of the first kind of autonomous innovation tech accelerators in the legal industry. And the insight that we brought was that we needed to create something outside of the normal operating procedures and structure of the law firm. So NextLaw Labs, and in fact this entire portfolio now that includes 2 service providers, a venture investment arm, and the beginning of a true global infrastructure, kind of a platform play. All of them are outside of the firm. They have their autonomous leadership, their own management teams, their own operating budgets. We work alongside the firm for sure, but we don't get captured into the kind of daily operational issues that you have to deal with within a law firm. But, so as we think about this though, and this is, to me, probably the most important thing any of us can acknowledge and say is that, innovation is not about technology. I mean, technology certainly is an enabler, but the innovations that are going to make the biggest difference are business model innovation. And the whole vision of NextLaw and what we're trying to do at Dentons is about reinventing and creating a different business model for the business of law. And that's what we're staking a claim in, and we'll see how it works out. But I think that difference between market takers and market makers really is all about the business model innovation. I mean, if you think about like a Netflix or a Uber or any of those folks, the incumbents that were in their space had all the same ingredients and capabilities to do exactly what Uber, Netflix, Airbnb are doing. But they were trapped within the confines of their own existing business model and corporate structure, and they couldn't do the kind of experimentation and business model change that these new disruptors did. And at the end of the day, I think that is the single biggest challenge in the law industry, especially for law firms. It's not so much about adapting technology. I mean, we're not very good at it because we never really had to be. But it's figuring out how to bring that technology in and how it ends up affecting our business model. And that's where the biggest resistance is, I think. So I think if we focus on the business model innovation, we end up having more sustained change in the industry. And so, what we're trying to do at Dentons is look at it as part of this ongoing continuous cycle that's very practical and focused. And we're building capacity. I'm not going to get into the weeds on everything that's a part of this program, and I can do that later. But the point is that just thinking about things from a very practical perspective to change culture. Because it's that culture change that is going to be necessary to enable the kind of new world order that we're trying to build. And it's not easy, that's for sure. But fortunately, we have engaged leadership that gets it. And it's not just about us. I mean, this is a collaboration process. We have to be involved in the ecosystem. I mean, when I started at the firm, Mark, in 2012, I had spent most of my career doing other things besides law. And when I worked for the Obama administration, I was charged with trying to drive this whole regional innovation cluster approach to economic development. And we use words like ecosystem all the time. And when I came into the law firm and started using words like ecosystem, it was like people rolling their eyes, they thought it was from Mars. But that's really what we are. We're part of this ecosystem, and we can't do it alone. We've got to have this collaboration. We've got to work together. And when we do that, I think it really does open up some tremendous opportunities for change. But as I said, it's really about culture. I mean, this is all a big change management perspective. Building a better, positive culture in our organizations, that is our challenge. And frankly, that is our innovation imperative. And all of you are leaders in your own fields, in your own industries, and I'm hoping that you'll join me in becoming part of this crowd of optimists who look at what's going on in the legal industry and get excited about it. Because it's just no fun being kind of trapped in all the doom and gloom stuff anyway. And so this is our opportunity to look at all these unprecedented changes that are real and embrace it and drive change in a way that's going to have a positive impact on our businesses, for our clients, for the communities we live in, where we work. I think it could be a really good thing, but we have to lean into it. We need to set the temperature, not measure it, right? That's the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. Everything we do in our own organizations, the teams we work with, our customers, everybody, every action we have sets a tone. And we have to bring into this environment a much more positive mindset. I mean, there's way too much cynicism, there's way too much skepticism. Everybody's ready to tell someone else how they did something wrong and point out their failure. That's not going to drive change. You know, we have to set the tone. And it's leadership, it's a commitment to an actual vision of what can be. And we all have that capability, and we need leaders who get it and who are willing to help set the temperature in the right way. And I think this is probably the best quote I could ever use in my world as a way to kind of sum things up around innovation in the legal industry, particularly in big law. You know, we use this a lot where I'm from. You know, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think if we all kind of adopt the right kind of attitude, lean into this stuff, the opportunity to change our industry are profound, and it could be that new golden era of law. So I look forward to working with you as we go through this journey together. Thanks.
John, thanks for your very, very inspiring remarks. Let me ask you a couple questions, if I may, and then we'll throw it open to the audience.
Okay.
First, you know, Dentons, as probably most people in the audience are aware, is the largest law firm in the world.
Modestly sized.
Yeah. What, about 10,000, give or take 1,000?
A little over 9,000.
Okay. So if one were to just have a 9,000 plus lawyer law firm on his plate, that would require quite a lot of cultural challenge because you are really global. How, with respect to the law firm, first part of the question, are you able to create a firm culture where you, especially where not only the geographies, but also you haven't built it largely organically? What is it that you've been able to do successfully to forge a culture?
Yeah, it's a work in progress, but I think the biggest, there's a couple of structural things and then just kind of a management approach, Mark, that address that. First of all, we have no headquarters. So as we grow, the way we describe it and the way it operates in practice is that we looked for firms who had a similar mindset about the marketplace and the business culture that we wanted to aspire to, and brought them in as foundational partners. So, you know, we did mapping of kind of the culture within the groups and found a lot of alignment. And so we don't have a headquarters, so we don't fly any national flag. So it's not like going out and planting a flag and trying to colonize the world. It's actually bringing people together to build a global enterprise. So with that, we also, as part of our values, really embrace this notion of being polycentric and being open to the fact that my Midwestern approach to something may not be the right approach, and that we need to be willing to talk to our friends. Like I was on the phone this week with colleagues in South Africa and Toronto and London. I mean, it's just constant. and just adopting that kind of mentality and openness to integrating ideas and cultures that might be different from your own is part of our DNA. And so those are kind of value things that happen. The operationalizing all of that is a challenge. And it's not just so much, Mark, that we're from all parts of the world, but in my world especially, different offices in different markets are at different places in the innovation journey. And so you have to adjust and adopt. So I might be working with offices in a small market who are at one end of the spectrum, and then working with lawyers in different markets that are way out on the other. And so you have to have some flexibility to try and drive things. And that's why it gets back to the innovation agenda isn't just about whiz-bang technology. It's about how are you innovating the way you do the work, the value proposition, the business model. And if you take that kind of approach to it, there's a lot more opportunities in unexpected places.
Right.
But it is a challenge.
Yeah. You also mentioned the whole notion of structure, which clearly I couldn't agree more is a critical element in terms of how legal services might perhaps better be delivered. Could you talk a little bit about how you and your senior management colleagues conceived of the structure that you've created? In one of your slides, you showed not just the law firm, but all the, dare I say, ancillary but very complementary portions of the Dentons ecosystem. Was that something you had in mind day one, or was this something that you kind of bolted on as you went along?
You know, it wasn't day one. I joined Dentons in 2012. And at the time, the idea of having somebody with innovation in their title was you know, pretty novel, to say the least. And we didn't have like a defined portfolio. It was, we're building a different kind of law firm. Here's our vision. Come help us do it, right? And so in all candor, I mean, probably about 18 months into my gig, I mean, I went back and sent out a leadership and said, man, you know, we got to do something different because I won't live long enough to affect the kind of change that we all want. And so we, you know, went and looked at the market and learned from our clients and figured out how, you know, there was great examples of various skunk works that were started by many of our clients, different kind of innovation labs that were sponsored by, but had the freedom and a safe environment to experiment and do things differently, and that's what we emulated. And that's how we landed and announced to our partnership in 2014 that we were going to do this thing called NextLaw Labs, and then we went on from there.
I have just one more question. Of course, you and I have had many back and forths together, but so I don't want to take up too much of your precious time. But one more question. You said that we're in the golden era of law. Earlier today, I called it the golden age of the legal entrepreneur. Yeah. I think pretty much the same concept. What kind of advice would you offer to someone early in her or his career in terms of how they might best prepare themselves to capture that kind of optimistic opportunity that you and I and hopefully others share in the room?
Yeah, that's you know, having grown up and been very involved with my university, and I get those questions a lot about what do you say to people who are coming up, and I always struggle with it, to be honest, because I mean I have a very unusual kind of path, and so it's hard for me to really know what's right for others. But I would say the one thing that I always say is know why you're doing what you're doing, you know, and if you're, you know, joining a law firm, know why you're joining that law firm. Or if you're going to law school, why are you going to law school? And really understand what journey you want to be on. And then if you're thinking about it, there's so many different pathways. There's no one path. And you know, what I think is really interesting and about why I think there is this potential dawn of a new golden era of law is that because of, you know, the work that Andrew and others are doing, you know, there is the opportunity to expand access to tools and knowledge that's been unprecedented, that you don't have to be in the biggest law firm in the world to have some of the best capabilities in the world. And for the work you're doing, for the market you're interested in, for the clients you're trying to serve, you're gonna have, you know, unbelievable opportunities to have high impact. And, you know, I went to law, not to law school. I mean, just, I don't want to digress too much in biography, but, you know, I was one of those people that I went to law school because I saw being a lawyer and having that knowledge as a sword I could wield. Because I was in the early days of my political career. I grew up in an environment around political activism. I did it, you know, because I wanted social justice, right? And I think it's, with the technology, you know, the cool thing about the fourth industrial revolution is that there's a decentralization, there's you know, digitization, and the democratization of knowledge, work, and power. And so, depending on why you want to be a lawyer, I mean, there's all these different pathways that you can go that can be profoundly impactful. So as long as you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think there's multiple ways to achieve success.
Well, let's throw the things open to the floor. Any questions for John? Yes.
So you mentioned about the biggest challenge actually is the business model, and then technology is helping lawyers to like working more efficiently and more accurate.
Yeah.
And then, but the funny thing is the billing system is billing by hour. Like, as if I'm a lawyer, I want to unite.
Yeah.
So how do you like how the market actually balances technology and then billing system?
Yeah, it's going to take time.
Okay.
But, you know, I mean, we didn't always have the billable hour, right? So, I mean, we've gone through evolution before here, and I think what's interesting to me is that some of the clients are really leaning into this in a strong way, and especially the ones that are leaning into it in a really thoughtful way. You know, it used to be for the last few years you would have, you know, a lot of talk about alternative fee arrangements. And we really want predictable pricing. We really want to be able to set a budget, and then you try and come up with a value-based budget. And most of the folks in the law departments had previously been in law firms, so they go back and reverse engineer everything and come up with, you know, what they think the average billable rate is. That's not what we're talking about. There's a lot of new approaches, and there's some phenomenal general counsel now who are working side by side with law firms, looking at the entire portfolio of work that needs to be delivered and historically has been delivered, looking at it in the context of the level of complexity and value to the organization, and segmenting out pieces of the portfolio based on complexity and value to the customer, and coming up with different pricing models that are more portfolio-based, more value-driven. And we have now all this data that we can bring to the table to inform those decisions. And I think that, you know, it's going to take time. I think that, you know, it's funny, it's one of the industries, and it's not the only one. I mean, other professional service organizations have gone through this, you know, even, you know, architects and others, where everything was kind of, you know, time and materials was kind of the basis of pricing. And, you know, in our industry, because of that model, you know, technology and the infusion of technology into the actual supply chain and delivery of services, those benefits don't immediately get passed on, right? So you have the productivity paradox. You know, I have a happy client who wants me to do X amount of work, and we come up with a budget, and you know, it's $100,000. But, you know, it's on billable hours. this sounds terrible, but I mean, you know, if you're that partner or that lawyer and, you know, they're happy with $100,000. But if I bring in a bunch of tech, if I automate some of the services, I do these things, I can bring the amount of time way down. And I should, and smart people do, because you know, you deliver more value, you get more loyalty, and you grow wallet share. But the model, not the people, the model just is set up so that there's this barrier, this paradox actually increasing productivity. And that's on the law firms to change. And they have to come up with a different kind of methodology for structuring compensation and dealing with the hard stuff. And that's why it's so slow and hard to change, because those are really big challenges. But the cool thing is that there are a lot of places where it's happening. And, you know, I mean, I'm working with a colleague who, you know, we're coming up with a whole different approach to how we want to deliver a certain kind of service for a certain sector. And the plan is to stand up a separate kind of unit where not everybody that's in that unit is in the same pathway and same systems as everyone else. We can do more kind of fixed fee approaches. You can bring more tech and innovation into it. But, you know, it's having to do it outside of the normal operating budget. And that's the really hard part. And it's not just for law. I mean, I don't care what industry. That's why, you know, the incumbents got crushed by Netflix and everyone else. Trying to drive two different business models within the same business simultaneously is tough. It's really hard to do.
Yeah. Andrew, and then Kristen had a question.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a plant, because obviously I don't judge.
But he is.
Yeah. But I get asked this question about what your work at NextLaw Labs like, and I actually have never kind of asked you, especially in the public area, but you know, what was that insight that led to the creation of it? Because a lot of people had the same information. Now, obviously, the size of Dentons is certainly unique, but what was it, and what do you think led to that happening? If we could have a little bit more insight into it, because a lot of the time I get asked, especially now, is that a lot more law firms are replicating that model, not necessarily the whole NextLaw Labs thing, but you know, incubators, et cetera. What was the secret sauce in a way that led to that happening?
I can answer that, and I'm happy to do it. I mean, the secret sauce is Joe, Andrew, and Elliot Portnoy. I mean, everything about Dentons in and of itself, whether you're a fan or not a fan, it's an innovation. They are incredibly visionary. They're willing to take huge risks, and they are very capable at driving forward their vision and being very consistent in their messaging and how they kind of move things forward. But it's that kind of leadership that enabled us to do this kind of work and give people like me, you know, a long enough leash to try and do it.
Crispin.
You say you're optimistic for big law when you talk about how long it takes to change because of culture. How much do you worry that new entrants, particularly in other markets beyond the US where there's more flexibility, they don't have that legacy to change, and therefore you haven't really got time?
Well, I think there's limits. Not all big law will thrive, right? Only those who understand it and really get it will. I think there's still something to be said for the brand of certain law firms, and we can't underestimate the value of that. That takes a lot of time to build up, and I think that's one of the competitive advantages. I do think, and I'm glad that other jurisdictions are being much more aggressive and liberal in how they're dealing with regulations. Because I think if we could unleash and if, you know, and I'll try not to get too political, but you know, the bar associations across, at least in the US, I mean, they are the most protectionistic group of people I've ever encountered. And I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm not anti-government, for God's sake, but it's like, it is so protectionist. And that is, to me, one of the biggest impediments to embracing this golden era, at least in our market. Because I would love to be able to have many more non-lawyer senior owners of our business.
We've got a number of hands, so I've got three. And what I love about this too, John, is you're getting questions from people with different backgrounds within the legal industry. So now we've got the academic side represented.
Hi, thank you. This is fascinating stuff. But as a legal academic in the room, I would love to ask you, we heard earlier from an in-house GC about what we can do on the education side to provide sort of the folks you want to hire. So what can you tell us as far as professors and faculty, what should we be thinking about or doing in terms of legal training for law students?
You know, I mean, that hasn't, I mean, I know it's a really important part of the ecosystem. I think, you know, some flexibility and change is certainly important. I think the best thing that law schools could do is try and make it more affordable. That's not the same thing as, you know, what should you be teaching, right? And
So that's one piece that we
yeah,
already have.
but that's part of it, because that creates this kind of environment, you know, that's really tough. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, I only know my own experience, and I had a pretty good experience, so you know, I'm not like hypercritical of the education institutions, other than some of these structural things, and I don't think that's unique to law. As someone who has a daughter who's just graduating and going to university next year, it's the same issue regardless of the area of study. But it's, I just think the other thing though is not to overreact. I mean, there's a reason for law schools, you know, and I'm a big fan of the multidisciplinary thinking, but there's a reason you have a law school. You know, it's not a business management school, and we have to kind of stay core to what it is actually about. You know, I shouldn't volunteer this because somebody will take offense, but you know, I just think we have to be really cautious about the, you know, I'm going to teach lawyers how to code. You know, here's, sorry, I'm old, so I'm going to get away with saying this, but when I started school as an undergrad in a public policy school, one of our requirements was computer programming. And we had to punch holes in cards and do Fortran and COBOL. And you know, I'm an agitator, right? So I'm like, I finally go to the dean, I'm like, what the hell? I mean, this is like the biggest waste of time. You know, we've got these other people who are designing computers that are really good at it. Why don't we change the curriculum that applies the technology, not try and write the code? And I think in law, that's probably the piece that matters, is how do we apply all this stuff, not try and actually go and code it, because I'm never going to be able to do what Andrew does, and I don't need to, but I need to know how to work with them and engineer new solutions. So I think there are some opportunities in the curriculum to think about how you apply some of this work to change what, you know, we're delivering. But I think for law schools, unlike, at least, you know, I have a master's degree too, and on the, you know, professional school side, there, at least historically, there seemed to be much more of a separation from becoming a practitioner versus, you know, getting a law degree. And I think, you know, bridging that, and I haven't been exposed to academia that much lately, so I may be completely out of date with where we're at, but I think that's a big deal, is that, you know, when you come out of law school, knowing how to lawyer, not just interpret the law, is kind of an important thing.
Yep. All right, so we have time for two more. This gentleman back there.
I wanted your perspective on this. Mark Herman, and about the law, wrote this piece about how law firms and in-house departments look at hours, right? So to a law firm, either you're billing or you're doing something else.
Yeah.
perspective, it's all the same, you're not billing. In a corporate general counsel department, there, of course, you attended meetings, you did all sorts of useful things. If we posit that law learning is interdisciplinary, so it cannot be all just law schools,
Yeah.
you're learning for the rest of your career. What would it take for the law firms to start developing models, business models that actually appreciate that associates would do well to spend a chunk of their time learning in a way that is rewarded as opposed to penalized in some fashion because you're not up to the same 2,000 or whatever hours in a given year?
Oh, this is going to sound like a cop-out. I think it's just not that simple. I think that most law firms do put a tremendous amount of value on time spent in professional development, working on other kind of company-wide or firm-wide initiatives, engaging in the community. You know, so I think there is a lot of value placed on those kinds of billable hour. At the end of the day, it is the metric, right? And you treasure what you measure, and if your entire compensation system only, it says all this other stuff is nice, but this is all we care about, then that's the culture you're gonna create, right? So I think part of it too is that, we need the law departments and the law firms to come together on a different way to do value pricing. Because I think until we do that, it's going to be really, really tough to get away from some of those internal issues around billable hours that get in the way of doing more creative stuff. And I just don't know how else I don't know how else you fix that. I mean, you have to come up with a different model that enables the firm to think differently about how they reward their people, how they allocate time, and encourage different kinds of collaborations. But if everything is still billable hours, I mean, it's just, it's a problem. It's an impediment, I should say. It's not impossible, but it is an impediment.
Okay, we have one last question from, yeah.
No, I really appreciate your sharing your thoughts about this, because obviously you guys are one of the most sophisticated players in the market. But I want to ask you about one other piece of play, because given what you said about the use of data by clients to segment out and distribute value in different ways, and the premises of the fourth industrial revolution about decentralization, radical entry, why is part of your thinking to build the biggest law firm in the world? Because those pieces, how do those pieces fit together for your strategy?
I think they actually fit well. I mean, our view is that nobody needs 9,000 lawyers. Right? I mean, you don't. But in a global commercial environment, I might need one in a certain jurisdiction with a certain specialty, and if I've got 9,000 of them, the odds are I'm probably going to have what you need. And so it's not about quantity. It's about a tool for quality and have the right kind of expertise that our clients need where they need it. And having that kind of polycentric attitude about how we grow and manage. I mean, you've got people who are actually embedded from those communities that hopefully can be more effective than someone just swooping in with that expertise. So I mean, that's part of it, but I do think it does give you some potential scale to do things differently. And frankly, I mean, there's still a lot of clients. I mean, I'm a fan of disaggregation and not trying to do everything in one group the way we've always done it. But for a lot of our clients, I mean, it's no secret that there's a lot more panels going on now, and they're consolidating because they don't want the hassle of having to manage 20, 30, or 100 different law firms scattered all over the world. So if you can bring together the quality in the right locations and a system to deliver it, it's actually a competitive advantage for our kind of business.
Well, John, we're delighted you made it, and let's give everybody.
Thank you.